Hi, good evening. Boss lady got me by surprise, so I'm not going to bring that up ever again in the 10-15 minutes that I have with you. Very, very thankful to PWSSama for creating this platform and the kind of speakers that we've heard over the last few hours, impeccable. I have been blown away. I was copiously making mental notes that, hey, this is very interesting. I should remember this when I go back home. But yeah, like the intro said, I am a researcher at heart, and like the popular saying goes, in Modi ji we trust, all else must bring data. And here I should begin by gathering some data. I have a few questions, and it will help if, and I think I can see most figures. It will help if you could just do a show of hands and help answer these questions. How many of you here believe that successful entrepreneurs are well regarded in society? Okay, okay. How many of you believe, how many of you see good business opportunities around you? Okay. How many of you believe that you have the skills to pursue these opportunities around you? Oh, great, wonderful, makes me very, very happy. And then, how many of you are holding back on these opportunities because of fear of failure? Almost 60% of those that see good opportunities. A global consortium called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor has been bringing data in from over 100 countries on the attitudes towards entrepreneurship and the incidence of entrepreneurship in these societies. They've been doing some impeccable work for over 23, 24 years, and they brought us data from India as recent as 2021. What do they tell us? The GEM, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor data, when you ask 100 Indians about if they consider successful entrepreneurs receiving high status, about 87.9%, 9.8%. When you ask 100 people about whether they see good business opportunities around them, about 83%, 83.4%. When you ask 100 people if they have the required skills to pursue these opportunities, about 85%, right? I mean, right there. When you ask 100 people that whether they will start or will they not choose to start, sorry, the question is flipped, will they not choose to start for fear of failure? 54%. So you see this first drop from 87 to a 54. And then the GEM data actually records the incidence of entrepreneurship. In India, out of 100 people, only 14 people are business owners. So you see this gap from 87% to a 14%. My submission is Indians don't need to be motivated for entrepreneurship. I mean, they're inspired enough. 87%. Usse zyada kya hoga? Right? This is good enough for a society. But it is this gap of a 87 to a 14, really a 72%, 73%. That is the gap around entrepreneurship that we need to solve for. It is this gap between inspiration and action that needs our interventions, and not really inspiration. There's enough. And actually some wonderful speakers, some wonderful business leaders are delivering inspiration in various formats. I'm not discounting them. Great. But what we need to do as a society, and especially a group that is working with youngsters, young adults, we need to be worrying about this gap of a 87 to a 14%. How should we do this? Sandboxes. Sandboxes, if you think about it, and the teachers here will know this better than I do, but etymologically it can be traced back to about 15th century, but essentially a sandbox was really just a space which had some boundaries, filled with sand for children to play in. That's all. When you just take that idea, abstract that idea, and apply it in a business context, in the real world context, sandboxes are simply spaces that have boundaries, and these needn't be physical spaces. These could be just mental spaces. These are just spaces that have boundaries, that allow for experimentation to happen, that allow for play to happen, that allow for trials to happen. That is what we need for boosting entrepreneurship in India. That is what we need for plugging this gap between 87% and 14% in India. Our research and the little experience that I have tells us that sandboxes do a lot of things, but the three that stand out for me is what I'd like to share with you today. Number one, sandboxes buffer risks. How do they do that? So think about any time that we do something for the first time, the perception of risk is quite high. What example shall we take? Let's say lying to your parents. Never lie to your parents. Bad idea. Never do that. But if you were to just venture that as an example, when you lie to your parents the first time, and when I lied to my parents the first time, the fear that I felt was really something. What if there was something to buffer that fear? Say an elder brother. Sandboxes do just that. They provide a buffer to what may happen if this risk may go awry. How do sandbox and how can this happen in the context that we're talking about? For example, PWS or any university, any higher education institution creates a sandbox program for 3 months for students to maybe get access to some capital or without any capital, design and run business ventures for that tenure. And having access to a mentor to talk through about their experiences, what they are learning, how do they fold those experiences in. By creating these boundaries of time, of initial capital available, and having a sounding board, the sandbox has buffered the size of the risk and maybe the negative consequences that could entail. If a student, if an entrepreneur was to do this out in the market, the negative consequences could be maybe manifold. But a sandbox, by just creating these boundaries, allows for limitation in the negative consequences that may follow. Number two, sandboxes allow for action to happen. As a nation, I think, not just as a nation, but I think the world over, we are becoming a society of thinkers, which is good. I'm not saying I'm a researcher, I tend to think as well. Thinking is great, but we need to make that shift into doing things. Unfortunately, forget the unfortunately. The reality is that a lot of our effort across spaces is going towards knowing things, towards thinking about things, while not as much in doing things. And the same thing, right? The more often you do something, you tend to build muscles, your mental circuitry improves with dealing with that ambiguity, dealing with that context, and therefore your ability to take risks improves over a period of time. I mean, Shreya delivered an impeccable talk today. Imagine seeing her again in 5 years. The power that she would unleash on the audience, I can't even, I think, begin to fathom, right? But the more often she does something, her ability to take risks, her ability to do that task better, just improves. Sandboxes, by creating those boundaries, by providing some resources, allow for these experiments to happen. At CII, we've run various kinds of sandboxes, such as we've created a fellowship for students of IIM Ahmedabad. They get a placement holiday for 2 years. They get some stipend, they get some fellowship, resources for them to try out their business idea. 2 saal chala, great. If it doesn't work for 2 years, come back and get your placements. So we've tried to reduce the opportunity cost, which can be quite high for, for an average student. So that was number 2. So sandboxes buffer risks, sandboxes provide spaces for experiments, for just action to happen. And the third, sandboxes create futures. And I'll give you, I'll maybe share a little anecdote with you. I ran a sandbox with about 52 students of an IIM, the campus of which was located in a, quite an unreachable place, and was very, very far from the nearby town. This sandbox had no capital in the beginning given to the students, but they were supposed to run businesses for 8 weeks. One of the groups of, I think, 5 students, they created a simple Excel sheet that could connect bike owners to folks that wanted to rent a bike for 2 hours so that they could go to the town and run an errand or get some grocery. Simple. Because they realized that there was this information asymmetry between these 2 groups. So while this business ran pretty well, in about 8 weeks, the students generated revenue of about 38,000, most of which was passed on to the bike owner. So all that is great. But how we created the future, this was in 2019, and I'm told that even today, this Excel sheet exists. This institution exists. The problem of not having access to a bike to run an errand has been solved in this institution. And that is how, just by a simple experiment of 8 weeks, led to a change in behaviors for the entire community and continues to sustain for a few years now, post-COVID as well. So, 3 submissions around sandboxes. They buffer risks, they allow for action to happen, they build a bias for action among students, and then they build the futures. The bias for action, actually sandboxes, and just maybe I'll speak a minute more about why is action so important. Most of us, when we think about setting a venture, have certain assumptions about how the world works, or how will I make the first investment, and how I will buy this machinery, or I will get this first customer, and that is how I will make this massively scaled up business. In a sandbox that we run for, again, postgraduate students, there was a small component, about 20,000 as initial capital. Every time that we run the sandbox, there is at least one team that uses 80% of their capital to buy some asset, some machinery that they think they will need to run this business. Every single time, we've had people come back and say, hey, maybe that wasn't the best use of this money. I didn't require to buy this asset. I didn't need to buy this machinery to be able to run this business. I could have used this money elsewhere and unlocked higher value. So the initial assumptions that we see, that we may tend to have as people, as humans, as entrepreneurs in making, tend to get sharpened, tend to be questioned when we do things. And therefore, that bias for action is what a sandbox unleashes, which of course leads to, I think, outcomes in the longer haul. But all of this is not abstract. If you were to think about it, and maybe to the students in the audience, what is the population of India? Any numbers?
130 crore.
130 crore? Almost 140 ho gaya ab to. So let's say 1.38 billion. What is the number of people, or the percentage of people less than 25 years? Any guesses?
Between 30 to 40%.
Between 30 to 40%, very close, about 46.7%. 46.7%, very small percent, right? That is about 600 million people. 600 million people is two USAs in just this country. Two USAs full of people less than 25 years of age is what we have around us. This is the group, and so many of you are here. You will build the future that we see, a future that impacts me and impacts all of us. Unless there is that bias for action, I am a little nervous about the futures that may follow. To all the teachers sitting here, to all the administrators sitting here, my humble request to you is for you to create these sandboxes, nudge your students to do things. Nudge your students to design experiments, and these could be something very, very small within the time available that syncs with their calendars, with their schedules, but nudge them to action, nudge them to do things. And it is quite heartening to see the TEDx club, just to see so many students running around, doing things, managing, taking responsibility. That, and again, with my little experience, that will lead to amazing benefits, not just for this person right now, but those around her as well. To the students here, who may have found some of this talk, if not all of it, a little abstract, my request to you, my urge to you will be, again, to build your own sandboxes. It's okay if you don't have, if your schools are not creating these spaces for you to experiment. You have such an amazing system called a family around you. Create your sandboxes with your family. If you need capital, seek capital. If you need advice, seek advice. But the responsibility of designing these experiments, designing these ventures, has to be on you. You have to believe me when I tell you that the future does not belong to thinkers. The future does not belong to people who know. Today, already today, forget 10 years later, today the machine knows more than any average human. The future will only belong to people who can do things. It is now, you've heard such fantastic speakers today giving you so many ideas. As you step out of this room, my only request to you will be roll up your sleeves and get down to doing things, because that is the only way you can build the future. Thank you.